And good evening. I'm Jean Casares of In Session in for Nancy Grace tonight. Stunning developments. Is Casey Anthony's brother, Lee Anthony, in legal trouble? The attorney advising him says Lee could face charges of obstruction of justice. And tonight, investigators reportedly focus in on computer searches inside the Anthony home. Did searches about a television show give new insight into Casey Anthony Zenaida Gonzalez story?
More like a hand. You're the middle finger, which was funny because you are the big guy.
An attorney claiming to be an advisor to Tot Mom Casey Anthony's brother Lee Anthony says Kaylee's uncle could face criminal charges. The advisor says that even if Lee Anthony were not aware that he was doing something illegal, the state could still seek obstruction of justice or aiding and abetting charges against him.
I know you're going to meet with, the investigators and everything. Is there anything specifically, the details that you want to clarify to me now? So when I'm following up on my own leads and my own information, putting the stuff together, that I can start working on it now.
At the moment, there's nothing specific or nothing that, should probably be said here.
Meanwhile, computer records reportedly show a search for the 100th episode of a television show where a nanny is suspected of kidnapping a child.
If I were to be looking for the nanny's place, would it be advantageous of me to look in areas that are familiar to another friend that you may have?
That would be pretty much on the money.
We're going to find Kaylee, and that's it.
Let's go straight out to Mark Williams, news director for WNDB News Talk 1150. Mark, what's the latest?
Well, Gene, the latest, of course, is could Lee Anthony be charged with obstruction of justice? Well, that may not happen anytime soon. The investigators right now wrapping up all their loose ends into the Casey Anthony case right now involving little Kaylee Anthony. The state attorney's office has not been asked to, of course, press charges against him as of yet. But his attorney, Tom Luca, here in Orlando, says Lee has been investigating. But if you have followed this show since at least July 24th, that has not been the case. Lee Anthony told his parents at one time, do not take any polygraph tests that have been administered or they want to administer to you. And secondly, the lawyer says, well, he gave up his DNA. That's a bunch of bull because they needed a search warrant for him to get his DNA. That's the only way he ever cooperated, with search warrants and through intimidation.
So these would be very, very serious charges, and this is coming tonight from the attorney advising Lee Anthony. Let's go on to Jane Velez Mitchell, who is the host of Issues with Jane Velez Mitchell. Jane, you just spoke with attorney Thomas Luca. What really struck you as you spoke with him?
Well, he wouldn't tell us why his client might be facing these obstruction of justice charges or the aiding and abetting. And I asked him, I said, could it be that Casey asked the brother to do something that he thought was an innocent request and later turned out to be incriminating? He said, no, you're absolutely wrong there. I said, well, did he throw something out of the house that he thought was something that he could just innocently dispose of that later turned out to possibly be important information or evidence? He said, absolutely no. So he wouldn't say why, but he says, reading the tea leaves, he's getting the idea that authorities are gearing up to charge his client. And what's so bizarre about it is usually a lawyer doesn't want to plant that idea in the authorities' heads and give them any ideas about charging your client. So for it to come from the attorney is really strange.
It is strange. Well, let's listen to attorney Thomas Luca in his own words.
No charges are pending as of yet. What we are concerned with, however, is that here in Florida, the laws regarding tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice are extraordinarily broad as opposed to other states. And because of that, there is some concern that some activities that Lee might have been involved with during the investigation might be seen by law enforcement to be misleading or to be in some way hindering the investigation. And that's what we're trying to make clear, that throughout this investigation, he has been cooperating fully. Mr. Anthony did not throw anything out. In fact, he has talked to KC several times in the jail at law enforcement's request in the search for his niece. He has been fully cooperating with police, including giving a DNA sample.
Let us go out to the attorneys right now. We can't wait any longer. Susan Moss, family law attorney, child advocate, prosecutor Holly Hughes, defense attorney Doug Burns, and George Prothro, also a defense attorney. First to Doug Burns. Tell me why it would be advantageous for an attorney who is advising Lee Anthony right now to come out on national television saying his client is truly being investigated by the Orange County Sheriff's Department.
I can't, Gene, and that's the problem. I find it highly unusual. I've been practicing criminal law 23 years. I'm not going to malign the gentleman, but by the same token, I find it highly unusual that an attorney would publicly say to the media, you know, by the way, they're, you know, likely to be charging my client with a crime. I don't see any merit to that.
Well, to Prosecutor Holly Hughes, these would be very, very serious charges because I've been researching the Florida law, and initially the attorney said aiding and abetting. I cannot find a criminal statute of aiding and abetting under Florida law. I do find accessory under the fact, which can be a first-degree or second-degree felony. I also find, obviously, obstruction of justice. Now he's saying tampering with evidence. What do you make of it?
What I make of it is he knows a heck of a lot more than he's telling us, and obviously because of attorney-client privilege, he has to keep so much of it secret. But he knows that Lee is in this up to his neck, Gene, because otherwise he's not out there trying to taint the jury pool and, oh, feel sorry for this family, and they're going after George and Cynthia, and now they might be going after Lee. And I think what he's trying to do is put it out there that the prosecutors are the big bad wolf, and they're going after this grieving family so that if and when Lee gets charged, they can say, oh, you know, they're over the top. Not only are they going after Casey, they're going after everybody else. But when he starts throwing around terms like tampering with evidence, aiding and abetting, I'm also thinking of party to a crime, depending on what he did, Gene. You know, he could be charged as, you know, not only tampering, but also as a party to whatever crime Casey committed if he was part and parcel. You know, they say in for a penny, in for a pound, Gene.
Well, Holly, it's interesting you say that because if you look at the indictment and if you look under count 2, which is aggravated child abuse, the prosecutor leaves it open for somebody else to be involved in this case. It is right there in black and white. It is interesting. To George Prothro, defense attorney, what I want to ask you is, after the remains were found on December 11th, George and Cindy Anthony were asked to give their fingerprints. They voluntarily gave it to law enforcement. But what we understand is that Lee Anthony waited until he was face-to-face with a subpoena before he did that and gave his fingerprints. Did he know something at that point?
Well, I don't think, Gene, that he knew anything at that point. I think it's very hard to speculate at this point on the evidence that we have, or the information that we have. But what I do think he may have been trying to do is to make sure that he was protecting his rights by waiting until he was required by subpoena to provide that information. Right. He has protected any rights if charges are later brought against him, if he is later added to the indictment, and if he has to go to trial, then that produces some issues at trial that may protect any evidence or protect his rights against any evidence that may have been brought in based on the evidence collected with that subpoena.
But to Leonard Padilla, bounty hunter, he helped search for Kaylee from day one practically. That's really what I'm driving at, because if George and Cindy Anthony voluntarily gave their fingerprints after the remains were found, but Lee Anthony, and he has every constitutional right to not do it voluntarily, but doesn't that mean that he may have information that an investigation was ongoing in regard to him at that point?
Lee not giving up his fingerprints voluntarily is a red herring. His situation is there's a daisy chain that extends from Casey all the way to the meter reader Crunk. They're trying to fill in the spaces as to who carried the message where the body was so that the meter reader could find it after the 4th try. Lee probably is the major suspect in the daisy chain because he's the one that had contact with Casey, and semi-coded messages were possibly passed from her to him. He in turn dealt with Hoover and the other private investigator, Dominic, eventually ending up with the information in Cronk's
But Leonard,
lap.
what are your facts to back that up right there, your theory?
Hoover showed me a video that he took of Dominic filming the area for about a minute and a half, exactly where the body was found. On the date, it says November 15th.
Papa, what's higher, Papa?